I have been speaking to you in a voice quieter than the sound you have been waiting to hear. Not the wind that tears down a mountain and leaves nothing standing on it. Not the earthquake that splits the ground open and swallows what you thought was solid under your feet. Not the fire that turns the whole sky the color of judgment and makes everyone in the valley look up at the same time. Right now, before these words are finished, notice with me that I have already been speaking underneath all the noise you have been straining to hear over. Come closer. Not because I am about to raise my voice. I never intended to. A particular kind of waiting keeps a person perched at the edge of their own life, ears turned toward the horizon, listening for thunder. You have done this. You have sat by a phone. You have refreshed a page. You have prayed out loud in a room full of people, and then walked home to an apartment that stayed exactly the same size and the same color as it was that morning, and you called the sameness proof that I had not answered. You have been so sure that if I spoke, you would know it instantly, the way you would know an earthquake, that you have missed the sound I have actually been making. Before this message ends, I want to show you why the quiet has been feeling like absence to you when it might be the very sound of me getting closer. And I want to hand you one line from my own word that will retrain your ears to recognize a voice you were taught to expect to be loud. I see you. I see the mother who is waiting for a phone to ring with news from a doctor, and who keeps the ringer turned all the way up even in the middle of a church service, because she has quietly decided that only a call loud enough to interrupt a hymn could possibly count as an answer to her prayers. The man refreshing his email at 2 a.m. has stopped believing anything quieter than an offer letter could possibly be me. There is a woman checking her phone under a dinner table right now, waiting for one particular name to appear on the screen, calling every minute it does not the sound of my silence toward her. The single one of you who prayed out loud in a crowded room and went home to a life that had not visibly changed has been handed, somewhere, the idea that a whisper does not count as an answer. Your own prayers have been getting shorter and more specific lately because you have started asking me for a sign so large it could not possibly be mistaken for coincidence. Why does it feel safer to trust a thunderclap than a whisper? None of this is strange to me. I built the mountain you are standing on to carry sound in more than one way. The teenager sitting on the edge of a bed with the door closed has been rehearsing an apology to a parent for weeks and calling the silence between them proof that forgiveness would need something dramatic to arrive. The widower setting 2 coffee cups down out of habit before catching himself has started to believe that comfort, if it is real, ought to announce itself loudly enough to fill the second chair. A father pacing a hospital corridor has been bargaining for a specific number on a screen, certain that anything less definite than that number cannot be me at work. None of these are small things. I am not asking you to shrink your longing. I am only asking you to notice what you have quietly decided counts as an answer, and what you have decided does not. Some of you fill every quiet minute with noise on purpose, without ever calling it that. Music, playing in a car that could sit in silence for 10 minutes without harm. A phone picked up the instant a room goes still, before the stillness even has a chance to say anything. A television left running in an empty living room, so the apartment does not feel as empty as it actually is. I'm not telling you this to shame you. I built you with a nervous system that flinches from silence for good reasons. Some of them from seasons where silence really did mean something had gone wrong. But I want you to notice the pattern, because a person who never lets a room go quiet will never hear a voice this small, no matter how close it gets. Here's the part that will sting a little, so let me say it gently. You have sat in a support group and watched someone else stand up with a testimony that had thunder in it. The diagnosis reversed. The marriage rescued overnight. The debt paid off in a single unexplainable check. And you have gone home afterward and quietly downgraded your own week, because nothing in it made a sound loud enough to tell a room full of strangers about. But listen carefully, because this is where the comparison breaks down. Their thunder does not make your whisper smaller. It only means their story was easier to summarize out loud. Yours may simply be harder to compress into 3 sentences, not less real for being harder to say. So before we go any further, let the air leave your body slower than it came in. Breathe in for a count of 4 if that is comfortable for you, and let it out for a count of 6 or 7 longer than it took to arrive. And notice, in the space right after the exhale, that nothing collapsed. That quiet did not undo you. That is worth paying attention to, because it is the same quiet I am asking you to trust me inside of. You have not stopped believing that I speak. You have started believing that I only speak loudly, and that has left you scanning the sky for fire while I have been forming a sentence right under your ribs. The thunder was never me. The whisper always was. Hold on to that line. I am going to hand it back to you before this is over, and I want it to mean something different by then. Here is where the lie starts to lose its grip. You have not been abandoned during the quiet stretches of your life. You have been misreading the instrument. A person who only knows how to listen for thunder will walk straight past a whisper and call the walking silence. The picture of me you have been carrying was assembled from the loudest stories anyone ever told you about me. Seas splitting down the middle, fire falling on soaked wood and drying it before it burned, storms silenced with 2 words. Every one of those stories is true, and every one of them was chosen because it travels well. A parted sea is easy to repeat at a dinner table. A whisper in a cave is not. There is nothing to describe, no special effect, nothing you could film. So the loud stories got told and retold, generation after generation, testimony after testimony, until a version of me got built that only shows up in capital letters. You inherited that version honestly. It was not malicious. It was simply incomplete, because the people handing it down to you were also only ever shown the highlights. The version of me you inherited would have you believe that if your circumstances have not changed dramatically, I have not moved at all. That version keeps a scoreboard. It expects visible, undeniable, sky-splitting proof, and it quietly grades your faith by how loud the proof turns out to be. If nothing thunders, that version tells you either I am silent, or you are not listening hard enough, or your faith was never quite large enough to earn the loud sign in the first place. And every one of those conclusions lands the fault on you. Never on the instrument you were handed to listen with. I need to correct that picture because it has cost you more than you know. It has cost you the ability to notice small mercies because you were trained to wait for large ones. It has cost you the courage to speak softly about what you believe in case someone asks for proof and all you have is a whisper. It has made you suspicious of your own quiet moments, the ones where a thought arrives that is kinder than the thought you were already having. More patient than your natural patience, steadier than your own steadiness. Because you did not recognize those as mine. You were looking for something with more thunder in it. So you let the actual answer walk right past you, unrecognized, dressed too plainly to be me. Here is where the false picture breaks completely. I am not less present when I am not loud. Volume was never the measurement of my nearness. A father does not have to shout across a room to be close to his child. He can be close enough that a whisper is the only thing that makes sense between them. Close enough that raising his voice would actually be the strange thing to do. I have not been withholding a louder voice out of cruelty or distance. holding back the fireworks until you have earned them. I have been speaking at the volume that closeness actually requires, because I was never trying to be heard from a distance. I was trying to be heard from right beside you. Think about the people you actually trust the most in your own life. I do not think it is the ones who only ever spoke to you in dramatic declarations. It is more likely the one who sat beside you in a waiting room and said almost nothing. The one whose ordinary Tuesday phone call you have come to recognize by the second ring. The one whose low voice in a crowded kitchen you can pick out without even turning around. Nearness builds its own kind of hearing over time, and that hearing has almost nothing to do with volume. I have been asking you for exactly that kind of relationship with me, the low voice in a crowded kitchen kind, and you kept waiting instead for an announcement over a loudspeaker. Do not confuse a quiet season with an empty one. A season can be completely full of me and completely silent to the part of you that is still listening for fireworks. The absence you have been grieving may not be an absence at all. It may simply be a presence you have not yet learned to recognize without the noise around it. This part is easy to skip past, so slow down here. Nearness and noise are not the same measurement. You can be in a house so full of shouting that you cannot hear the person standing right beside you, and you can be in a house so quiet that a single held breath is the loudest thing in the room, and be closer to that person in the second house than you ever were in the first. I have never once confused proximity with volume. Only you have been doing that because it was the only measurement anyone ever handed you. I once loved a man enough to feed him with my own hand when he wanted to die. And I want to walk you through a morning on the side of a mountain when he finally learned to listen the way I am asking you to listen now. His name was Elijah. The day before this story, he had called fire down out of a clear sky in front of a whole nation that did not believe in me, and every person watching had fallen on their face. It was the loudest, most undeniable thing I have ever done in public. Less than a day later, he was running for his life into the wilderness, sitting down under a solitary tree, asking to die, certain he was completely alone. Read that again slowly, because it matters. The man who had just witnessed the loudest, most public, most spectacular thing I have ever done was within a single day exhausted, terrified, and convinced he had been abandoned. Fire from a clear sky had not fixed the thing that was actually breaking him. A queen wanted him dead, and the fear of one determined enemy outweighed the memory of a miracle. This is worth sitting with for a moment before you move on. Spectacle can prove a point in a single instant, and still fail to carry a person through the very next one. You already know this, if you are honest with yourself. You have had your own version of fire on the mountain, an answered prayer, a clear provision, a moment you could not explain away by luck or coincidence. And you have also had the next morning, when the old fear came back anyway, and the old questions returned as if the fire had never happened at all. I did not scold him for that collapse. I sent an angel to touch his shoulder while he slept, gently, twice, once, for each meal set beside him, bread baked on hot coals and a jar of water. And I let him rest between the meals, because sometimes the most spiritual thing I can do for a person is let their exhausted body sleep before I ask their soul a single question. No fire that time, just a touch on the shoulder and food left within reach. On the strength of that food, he walked 40 days into the wilderness until he reached a cave on the side of the very mountain where fire and smoke and trembling ground had announced my presence to his people generations before he was born. He knew that story well. He had grown up on it. So when he finally arrived, hollowed out and starving for meaning, and I asked him a simple question, "What are you doing here?" he answered with a complaint about being alone, about everyone else giving up on me, about being the only faithful one left in the whole nation. He was still waiting, without fully realizing it, for the mountain to repeat what it had done for him before. I told him to go outside and stand on the mountain, because I was about to pass by. This is what is written. 1 Kings chapter 19, verse 12, along with the 2 verses just before it. And behold, the Lord passed by, and a great and strong wind rent the mountains and broke in pieces the rocks before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind, and after the wind an earthquake. But the Lord was not in the earthquake, and after the earthquake a fire. But the Lord was not in the fire, and after the fire a still small voice. Read it slowly. Take it apart with me, one piece at a time, because every clause is doing work. Notice first what came, and in what order. Wind strong enough to tear a mountain apart and shatter solid rock into pieces. Then an earthquake. Ground moving the way ground is not supposed to move. Then fire. The exact category of miracle he had already watched me perform on that other mountain just weeks earlier. Every single one of those 3 events was a kind of thing he already associated with my presence, because those were precisely the categories my presence had used before, at that very location, in front of his own ancestors. And every single time, the text does not hedge or soften the statement. It says plainly 3 times in a row, the Lord was not in it, not the wind, not the quake, not the fire. 3 enormous, undeniable, terrifying displays passed directly in front of a desperate, grieving man who badly needed to hear from me, and I was not present inside any one of them. And then, after all 3 had passed, and the mountain had finally gone quiet again, came the voice. Small, hushed, so gentle that some translations render it a whisper, and others render it a sound of thin silence, as if the quiet itself had a texture you could hear. That is where I was the entire time, not absent during the wind and the quake and the fire, waiting patiently for my proper turn to arrive. Present the whole time, in every single minute of that terrifying display, but present in the one register a person only hears when the noise has finally stopped, and they are still there, still listening, still willing to stay in the silence long enough to catch it. Look closely at the shape of that sentence. It does not say the wind came, and then, separately, a voice came. It says the wind came, and I was not in it. It repeats that same structure 3 times. Wind, quake, fire, each one paired with the same quiet correction. Not there. Not there, not there. The writer wanted you to feel the weight of 3 consecutive disappointments before the voice ever arrives, because that is exactly what it feels like to live through a season where every dramatic thing you hope might be, me turns out to be only the storm passing through. I am not telling you the storms never come. I am telling you the storm was never the place where you would find me standing. Notice, too, the words themselves. Not loud and small, not violent and gentle. The text pairs still with small and lets the 2 of them do the work together. Hushed enough to require your full attention, modest enough to be missed by anyone still listening for a spectacle. That combination was not an accident. A voice that size cannot compete for your attention. It can only be found by someone who has already decided to stop competing for anything else. Notice what he did the moment that voice arrived, because it tells you everything. He did not need it explained to him twice. He wrapped his face in his cloak and went to stand at the mouth of the cave, because something deep inside him recognized instantly that this, not the wind, not the quake, not the fire, was the moment that actually required his full attention. He had just watched a mountain split apart in front of him and stayed seated. It was the whisper that finally made him cover his face and rise to his feet. And noticed too what I did after he came out to stand at the mouth of that cave. I asked him the exact same question I had asked him before the wind and the quake and the fire even started. "What are you doing here?" Not a different question for the man who had just survived a whisper instead of an earthquake. The same one. He gave me almost the same answer he had given before. Still afraid, still convinced he was the only faithful one left, still carrying the same exhaustion he had carried into the cave. The whisper did not erase his fear on contact like a magic word. It did something slower and more lasting than that. It gave him new instructions, a new commission, and a companion he had not known he still had. And it sent him back down the mountain able to keep walking, even though the fear had not fully left. That is usually how the whisper works. It rarely erases the problem in a single stroke. It gives you enough to take the next step anyway. I have said this in another place, in a different voice, through a different mouth. The ones who belong to me learn the sound I make, and they follow it, not because it thunders, but because they have spent enough quiet time listening to know it the instant it comes. The way you would recognize a familiar footstep on a stair before you had even seen who it belonged to. That kind of recognition does not arrive from a single dramatic encounter, no matter how impressive. It grows the way trust grows between two people who have talked quietly, many times, in ordinary rooms, until one particular voice becomes unmistakable among 100 others in a crowd. That is not a lesser way of knowing me than the fire and the parted sea. It may, in the end, be the truer one, the one that lasts through every ordinary Tuesday the loud stories never mention. Now look back at what I told you when this message began. I told you the quiet has been feeling like absence to you, and I promised to hand you a line that would retrain your ears. Here it is, in full, from the mountain. I was not in the wind. I was not in the earthquake. I was not in the fire. I was in the whisper. Whatever wind has been tearing through your life lately, whatever ground has felt like it was splitting under your feet, whatever fire has burned hot enough to make you want to look away from it, none of those were where you were supposed to be searching for me. I have been in the small, steady, easy-to-miss voice underneath all of it the entire time, waiting for the noise to pass, so you would finally stay still long enough to hear it. My own son lived this out on the water, once, in a small boat being torn apart by wind and waves that felt exactly like judgment to the men riding in it, certain they were about to drown. He did not answer that storm with a bigger storm of his own. He stood in the middle of the chaos, half asleep only moments before, and spoke 2 quiet words, and the wind lay down at the sound of a whisper, because his authority was never dependent on matching volume for volume. Later, on a different day, in front of a crowd shouting for his death, the loudest sounds in the room were the accusations and the hammer and the crowd itself, and the most important thing he ever said that day was almost too soft to hear over all of it. A handful of words, spoken low, from a body that had almost nothing left to speak with, that finished a work no amount of thunder could have finished, because it was never going to be won by volume in the first place. It was going to be won by a whisper that outlasted every loud thing standing around it. So hear this plainly, because I do not want you carrying a counterfeit hope out of this message and mistaking it for mine. I am not promising you that a specific phone will ring today with the exact words you have already rehearsed hearing. I am not promising you a burning bush moment on a date you get to choose, or that everyone around you will suddenly agree with you at once, or that a particular door will swing open by an afternoon you have already circled on a calendar. I will not dress up a guess as a certainty and hand it to you wearing my name. And I will not let you leave here waiting for a spectacle that was never the point in the first place. What I am promising is smaller than that and steadier. I am already speaking. I have been the entire time, through every wind, every tremor, every fire you have lived through. And the voice you have been waiting to hear loud enough to notice has been forming, quietly in the exact space you kept scanning past on your way to the sky. If that recognition is landing somewhere true in you right now, tell me so with one small word. Right where you are. Still. So here is something small you can carry with you into the rest of your week, if you want it. And there is no pressure attached to it either way. Somewhere today, for 1 full minute, stop asking me for anything. Do not bring me a request or a list. Just get quiet enough on purpose to notice whether I might already be speaking underneath whatever is loud in your day. The notifications, the argument replaying in your head, the worry you keep rehearsing. You may not feel a difference the first time you try this. You may not feel it the 10th time either. And that is completely normal. Do not let that discourage you into quitting. But somewhere around the 30th quiet minute, spread out across enough days and enough ordinary Tuesdays, you start to recognize the shape of a voice you have heard before. Low and familiar. The way you would recognize a familiar footstep on a stair before you had even seen who it belonged to. You do not need a cave for this, or a mountain, or 40 days of walking to earn the right to try it. A parked car before you go inside the house. The last minute of a shower after the water has gone from hot to warm. The short walk from your desk to the parking lot at the end of a shift. Pick one ordinary minute you already have and give it back to me on purpose instead of filling it with one more scroll through a screen that was never going to speak in a voice you could actually recognize. Pay attention, too, to what happens in your body the moment silence begins. Because most people flinch at first. The instinct to reach for noise is not weakness. It is only a habit, built over years of assuming that quiet meant something had gone wrong. You are allowed to notice the flinch without obeying it. Let the silence sit there a moment longer than feels comfortable. That extra moment is usually where the whisper has been waiting the whole time. While you're practicing that, notice your jaw. Find the place at the hinge of it, right below your ear, where tension likes to gather without you ever choosing it. And let it go soft, the way you would loosen a fist you did not realize you had been making all day. Most of what you have been calling listening has actually been bracing. Bracing for the wind. Bracing for the ground to move under you again. You cannot hear a whisper while every muscle in your face is braced for an earthquake. Let the jaw go slack first, and notice how much the listening tends to follow right behind it. The whisper does not compete with the wind. It was never trying to. It simply outlasts it, patiently, because it was never dependent on volume in the first place. And neither is my love for you. You are not waiting on a mountain that has to split apart before I can reach you. You already know that now, even if you are still learning to trust it. Remember what I told you at the start. The thunder was never me, and the whisper always was. He can tear at the mountain. He has never once reached the quiet place where I speak. That is the whole of what I wanted to tell you today. Not that your circumstances will announce themselves with fire before the week is out. Only that I am already close enough to be heard without it, and that I have been for longer than you realized. Amen. Before you go, there is a short page I left in the pinned comment. A few quiet lines meant for the next time your own noise gets too loud to hear anything underneath it. And if a name came to mind while you were reading this, someone who has been waiting for something loud to prove I am real, send this their way. It might be exactly quiet enough for them to finally hear.